And they took my hand, whispered, close your eyes and understand.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Raise.Dev Hacktoberfest Help Desk. This is the last show of the day. If you are new to the show, the Hacktoberfest Help Desk is your resource for helping you land your pull requests this Hacktoberfest, whether that means answering your questions and giving you all the tips you need to get those pull requests done, or helping you discover new projects and new ways of contributing. Today, I am super excited because all of you wonderful people in chat, Shreyas, Nicholas, welcome back. I get to hang out with you today because our founder, John Britton, is taking the reins and hosting this evening. We've got another special guest with us, Corey, who will bring on very soon. Baby Groot, you're in the perfect place. I'm about to run through all of the info about what you've got coming up, where to sign up, that kind of thing, and then we'll get into the show. So just before I bring on our guest, a couple of house notes and a ministrivia. First of all of you lovely people in chat, you're already chatting away. That is great. Keep it going throughout the show. We will be answering your questions as we go. I'll be making sure that John and our guests see those questions and get them answered for you before the end of the show. If you ask something that's not directly relevant to what we're talking about, that is totally fine. You can ask about your projects. You can ask about related topics. Just letting you know in advance. We will get to those questions for the end of the show. We won't necessarily change tack in the middle of explaining something. If our guest is explaining a piece of code they're currently looking at, we're not going to go talk about what he likes to cook for dinner right at this moment. But we will get back to that before the end of the show. So do not panic, okay? Next up, if you want to post links or you want to post, or you've got a resource you want to share, or you want to post a link, Nicholas, do not even start with me. We've had enough of the "is this pre-recorded" banter this week. No, thank you, sir. Definitely not pre-recorded. If you want to post links or share anything, you're very welcome to do so. Just please let us know in chat by @RaiseDevs. As I said, I'll be hanging out in chat with you, so I'll be able to get on that bot really quick For those of you who are new to the show, we have a bot active in the chat to keep us free of spam so that the chat is a good place for y'all. And it will filter out links automatically. So if you want to post a link, it's totally fine. Just let me know and we'll make sure that you can do that. So next up, answering your questions, Baby Groot. This is a show that's live 3 times a day, all throughout Hacktoberfest. Our schedule is on our Twitch page, but it's currently out of date. It gets updated over the weekend. If you hang around at the end of the show, I'll run you through all of the great shows and guests we have coming up next week. So stick around for that. This is our last show of the week. We don't stream over the weekend, but we will be back on Monday. But in the meantime, if you want to find out what Raise.dev is about, we are a service to help you level up in your developer career, whether you're trying to get your first job, trying to move from mid-level to senior, trying to get a raise, trying to get a promotion, trying to become an engineering lead, whatever it is, we are here to help you get the experience you need to make that transition with the help of our expert coaches. So our coaches will meet with you, they'll work with you on your plans, they'll pair a program with you, get you towards like completing a project, completing whatever it is you need to get that experience and set you off on your way. And whilst you're in early access, we are completely free. So Baby Groot, there's 2 things for you. You can follow us here on Twitch to get notifications all the times we're streaming, as we've got 15 more shows next week, I think. 15 shows left until the end of Hacktoberfest. So we are here 3 times a day, but also you can sign up to get a coach to help you with your development skills at raise.dev. So I hope that answers our first question. So that is everything from me. That's my starting ramble. I will get out of the way. Let me add on our host for the day. Please welcome our founder, John Brillen. How are you doing, John?
Hey, thanks, Joe. How you doing?
Cool. I'm very good. And let me give you your guest, and then I will disappear. Have a great stream.
Thank you. Hi, Corey. How are you doing today?
Hey, how's it going? Doing pretty good. How about you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for joining us on the show. I'm really looking forward to diving into some of these open source projects. Just for kind of a heads up for everybody, the plan for today, we're going to get to know a little bit about Corey, and then we're going to do 2 segments. One is called Get Blame, where we're going to look at some code that he wrote a long time ago, see what he's learned since then, think what we would change if we did it differently now, what's changed in the language, kind of get into some details there. And then we'll go through a show and tell, looking at one of your more current open source projects. And so, Corey, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into software development, what your kind of story is, what your journey is? Keep in mind that most of the folks that are, following this stream or getting involved with Raise.dev, they're on a journey trying to get to the next level in their developer career. And so it's really helpful for them to kind of hear people's stories of how they get started and like what kind of the major breaks were for them in their pathway.
Yeah, so I've been pretty lucky in becoming a developer. I had an uncle who was a developer. Who's worked at Dell for a long time. That's what I remember as a child. And he got me into programming really early. I remember going to Disney World with them one time, and he got me a Learning Java for Dummies book. And I remember not wanting to do Disney World and just read Learning Java for Dummies. So it's been a long journey for me. But I've always enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Can you tell us about, kind of the jump from doing it for fun into, doing this for a job? What was your first job, and how did you kind of find that and get into, software development as a career?
Yeah, that's fair. It's always something that I thought I wanted to do, but it was definitely interesting to fall into it. So I was doing some web development stuff in like high school, just for learning, just for having fun, figuring things out. And I started a class at high school where I got to be in charge of helping the yearbook create the website for the yearbook at my school. And eventually we hired a web developer consultant to come in and be like, hey, how bad did these high school students mess up this website, basically? And I guess I impressed him, because by the end of that, he asked if I wanted to do some consulting with him and make some websites for people. Cool. So it was a really good, it was really good experience to build a website for fun and for the school, and be able to transition that into actually working on some more real website projects and stuff.
I think this is a trend that I see over and over again when I'm talking to developers about getting into the space, is that they're doing something that they like, and somebody sees them and notices them and goes out of their way to create an opportunity. That's kind of what our whole, kind of philosophy at Raise.dev is trying to create more opportunities for more people to get into the field. But one of the things that makes those opportunities possible, and I think just in general advice for developers getting into the career, is to be out there doing things. Create as many opportunities to meet new people as you can, to do side projects, get involved in open source, whatever it is, because then you meet more people and there's more chances for something like that to happen, where somebody sees you and says, oh, like, maybe it's not the best job in the world, but it's like, hey, I can make a few bucks and get some experience, and like it opens up the next door. So I just see that over and over again with people. And can you tell us, what are you doing now as a developer? Like, are you working full-time as an engineer? Where are you at? What kind of software development do you do? What languages, what stacks, what do you focus on?
Yeah. So I'm a full-time web developer at the moment. I work for a company called Wellsheet. We're a medical company. We build a product that helps doctors manage their patients better in the hospital, spend less time at the computer screen, hopefully, and more time actually interacting with patients and stuff like that.
Cool.
So yeah, it's a fun space to be in and everything.
And what tech stack are you using, most frequently?
So we're a Rails shop. We have a React front end and a Rails back end. Rails is on the back end is my home base. It's where I feel comfortable.
Sounds good. All right. So the first thing that we're going to do today is look at some code that you have from the past and kind of go back through that. What I understand is a project called Sleet that you're going to share with us. Can you just give me like an overview of like, what is Sleet? Why did you make it? And before we even get into the code, just like, what's the purpose of the application and what does it do?
Yeah, definitely. So Sleet is a tool I built in Ruby. So it's a Ruby command line tool. And its job is to help the workflow of a software developer. It's to make it faster to figure out what tests failed for you in CI. So it integrates tightly with Circle CI, and mostly just because that's the one I'm using, not for any super particular reason. But it integrates with Circle CI, and it uses a feature of RSpec, the testing framework in Ruby, that allows you to basically run locally just the things that failed in CI is the end outcome. So I can just type Sleet in my command line, and then with the configuration all set up, it'll find what specs failed for me in CI, and then be able to run them locally. So very useful for when you got a big test suite, 20, 30-minute test suite, and you don't want to run it all locally, and you had a failing PR. So yeah.
I got you. And so like the case is like maybe it's running in CI and it runs in parallel or something, it runs faster, and you don't want to just run it on your local machine because it takes a really long time, or you just know that you only want to run those failed tests. And rather than like go through and find exactly, like I know in RSpec, when I want to run a certain test, I just type, bundle exec RSpec, the name of the test file, like the path to the test file. And then I can even like do like, I think it's like hash, like the line number or something like that.
Number. Yep.
Yeah. Or it's colon line number. And then it will run basically every context that line number hits. So like the top level context of that line number, but you have to like look it all up. It's kind of tedious. Another thing that I do with RSpec is I use this thing called Guard. I don't know if you've ever used Guard before, but it's like a local. Excuse me?
I've used similar tools to Guard.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, Guard is another interesting tool you can check out for Ruby and for RSpec that basically runs your tests, and it listens for like file modifications and then runs only the tests relevant to that file that was changed. So it's another way to avoid running the whole test suite, but it's not based off of what failed. It's based off of what changed in your code base. So it sounds related. So why don't you go ahead and like bring up the project on GitHub, and we can share screen and like kind of talk us through. This is the approach I like to take when we go through projects on the stream is kind of the way that I also am involved in doing interviews. So I do a lot of technical interviews, and I really prefer technical interviews that talk about code you've written in the past, rather than like doing some kind of whiteboarding example or some trivial thing that I want to see if you like know exactly this esoteric fact that I want to ask about. And the reason I really love this conversation is it's because like it's something that you know in and out already, and we can talk to you about why you did things a certain way and get to know your thought process. So like I'll kind of come at it from that angle. And the first thing I really like to do is just understand what's the architecture of the project and kind of the file structure. We don't even need to look at any code yet. Just like kind of give us a lay of the land, as if like maybe I'm a new open source developer wanting to contribute. How would I orient myself in your project?
Yeah, that sounds great. It sounds like a plan. I'll get Sharon here and we can dive in. Okay.
So while you're getting that up, I have there's a user temporarily suspended. Welcome to the chat. I'm glad to see you here. And then I also saw a question about how do you pick a project to contribute to on Hacktoberfest. If you're looking for projects for Hacktoberfest, the best thing to do is to go to github.com, click on Explore, and that will take you to an area of GitHub defined projects. You can choose from a dropdown. You can choose different languages, things that you're interested in, and then you can collect on the topic called Hacktoberfest. And that topic will have all kinds of projects with issues, good first issues to get into. So that's a good way to get into it. So Corey, why don't you go ahead and talk to us about Sleet?
Yeah, okay. Just quick on that. I actually don't have either of the projects I'm going to talk about today marked as Hacktoberfest because I haven't gotten around to it. But if people are interested, we can definitely. I will definitely tag it as Hacktoberfest, and you're more than welcome to come and contribute as well.
Excellent. Really appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay. So let's take a look at Sleet a little bit. This is the README GitHub page hosted README. I think we'll probably just go to the GitHub here instead.
Do you have some kind of like dimming on your screen?
Oh, maybe.
Maybe if you have that, maybe you can disable that just to make
there
it
we
easier
go. Sorry about that.
Much better. And then
off.
also font size is helpful if you increase font size.
Let's get this up a bit. Looking better?
Beautiful. That's much better.
Awesome. Perfect. Okay. So this is Sleet. This is a Ruby project. So let's just take a look at this to go along with, oops, not this specific commit. I just wanted to look at the history of commits to see that I actually haven't worked on this in a while. I bumped some stuff in 2020 in June, but besides that, it looks like I've had some PRs and not stuff for a good year and a half. So we're doing good on looking at a project that I'm not super fresh with.
Okay.
Okay, so let's just do a quick demo that I have set up real quick, just to walk through how Sleet works. And I think that'll be a good intro to look at the code. So I created this pull request on the Sleet repo as a demo for the stream here.
Mm-hmm.
And before we look at the code, we'll just realize that Circle CI's got some red checks here, and I've got some failing tests.
Yep.
So let's do this and increase my font size in my terminal. There we go. So let's actually just see. I need to switch to the right place. There we go. Awesome. Okay, so let's just test this out. So if I'm on my branch for the raise.dev demo, and if I just run Sleet, if I already have it pre-configured, we'll see that it created a file for me for rspec example statuses based on build 288. And just for demo purposes, that's the right build number here that we're looking for. And so now,
can you also increase the terminal size on here? Just so
yeah, more? Yeah, for sure. Let's see how high I can get this up. That looking a little better?
A little bit. It's just hard to read on the command line.
Yeah, for sure. I'm giving it some more.
There you go. That's readable, I think.
Okay, let's go real big then. We'll make it nice and easy to stream. Okay. So we've got our file, and now we're going to take advantage of some RSpec things, and we'll talk about this more in a sec. But we can run in RSpec only failures. And there we go. We just got 3 failed specs out of the 3 we ran. So we only ran some specs that failed here, which is pretty nice. So that's the developer workflow that I was looking for here to try to do. And yes, I do love when things actually work on the first try. That was nice.
Yeah. So you're taking advantage of a feature in RSpec that if there's a file on disk that indicates which tests failed, that you can use that only failed flag and it will just run them. So Sleet is basically creating that file for you. Can you show us what that file looks like?
Yes, we definitely can. So let's look at that. That's the RSpec example statuses file. I think it's that file. RSpec. Here we go. This file. So this is a file that's generated by RSpec when you run your test suite. And it looks kind of a lot like the file name incantations you were talking about earlier of how you run RSpec on specific lines. This 1:1 and 1:2:1 is different than line numbers. And it's how RSpec refers to like the different nested describe and context blocks. So these refer to like actual examples we're running. But you can see that it just has some stats on passed and failed and how long they took.
Yep.
And you can see these are the 3 that are failed. And yep, we're just leaning on a feature in RSpec to run only the failures. So yeah, Sleet's job is to create this file for us, basically. Yeah, so I think we might as well hop into some code. And I guess actually we'll do that. Let's do that in editor, I think. Okay, so let's just take a look at what we got. We got a relatively standard directory structure for a Ruby gem here.
Mhm.
We've got our gem spec to define the actual gem and dependencies, and then we're going to mostly live in lib here. We also have the exec directory. This is going to be the actual executable that will run. So this is probably the entry point for the CLI here. Bin scripts just for development, and a docs, which is mostly for the Google pages.
Okay. Just for folks who aren't familiar with Ruby gems, Ruby gems are just a way to create a package in Ruby that you can share. Did you start this project with the intention of building it as Ruby gem, or did you extract it out of something? What was your thought?
Yeah, the intention of this one was to build it as a Ruby gem. So it started on its own as a Ruby gem, and has evolved from there.
Cool.
So yeah.
So let's see what else. So you guys, pretty standard directory structure. I see that you also have specs on this. That's good.
Do you have a few?
And maybe can you look just at sleet.gemspec real quick?
Yeah.
And just show us what that is.
Yeah.
For the folks coming from like JavaScript, this is kind of like your package.json file in JavaScript land. This is what defines what's in the gem. So yeah, like maybe you can just walk through kind of broadly like this stuff.
Yeah, so like you said, I love that as a comparison. This is a lot similar to package.json from JavaScript. So define the name and version, author and email, all of that fun stuff. It also you also want to tell it what spec files you have, what executables you have, and what's a little bit nice about gem spec is this is actually just a Ruby file. So unlike package.json, which is just JSON, you actually can run some Ruby here and do some fun things. So like this is actually you doing a grep over the files and looking for executables instead of just having a hard-coded list.
Yeah, the one that I like is up above on line 21, where you're basically in your gems in your gem spec, you have to specify all the files that are part of the gem, and you're just running a git command that gives you a printed list of all the files in the directory. So you don't have to like add each file manually. I like that as well.
Yeah, it's definitely just a time saver, right? Because it's the thing I would always forget to do, add a file to this list. So
for Ruby, you have a gem file and you have a gem spec. What's the difference between the gem spec and the gem file here?
Oh, that's a great question. So I have a very small gem file here. And in general, the difference in Ruby, a gem spec is something you would only use for a gem, a shared package, like you were saying earlier. And like an application would probably just have a gem file. So for this gem, the gem file just says that we are referring to the gem spec that we have in the other file. And then it does add some test-only dependencies as well. Like we don't need the JUnit formatters when someone is actually using Sleet, but I want it in test to give me nice printed things in Circle CI.
So this limits the dependencies you're forcing on your users, basically.
Exactly. So if we switch back to the gem spec, all of these under add dependency, lines 27 through 34 here, these are the ones that are actual dependencies for users. And then I have a few development dependencies down here. And then the reason that I have the test dependencies in gem file is because the gem spec doesn't support the third category of add test dependency. It just has development and production. So I wanted a test, so this one has a little bit hanging out in the gem file there.
So it looks like we have a question. So the gem file would be like the scripts and dependencies section of packet.json from JavaScript. I think that's pretty close.
Yeah, I think it's definitely close. Just because it was mentioned there, they don't have the concept quite as much of scripts in Ruby. You don't have like the built-in script support that you get in package.json. But besides that, yes, I think it's a very, very close comparison. So
another thing that I really like doing when we're like looking at old code is looking at the dependencies, and just like one of the things that I think is really fun to do is go and read other people's code and look at their dependencies and see what dependencies they have, because sometimes you find cool stuff that you didn't know existed. So let's look at your dependencies here, and like maybe if there's anything that you think is particularly interesting, we could talk about what that thing is. I don't think we need to go through every single one. Like RSpec, obviously we know is the testing thing, but like what in here are you using like heavily and you think is cool?
Yeah. So there's not a ton, so we can probably just go through them one by one here. So colorize is going to help me print out pretty colors on the CLI. I'm using it for printing out greens and reds. Faraday and Faraday middleware are the HTTP libraries. relatively standard Faraday allows you to add middleware for response lifecycle. I'm actually very interested to see what I'm using middleware for in this project, so we'll get there in a few.
Yeah.
RSpec, like you said, is the testing thing, and interestingly enough, this is in the usually for RSpec, I would see this in a development or a testing section. But Sleet actually depends on RSpec at runtime to help generate that file that we looked at earlier, that RSpec example statuses file. RSpec, surprisingly enough, knows how to format that file well, and I leaned on their code instead of trying to rebuild
writing it again. Yeah.
Yes.
Makes sense.
So Rugged here, this is one of the more interesting dependencies, and this is a pure Ruby Git gem. So it's written in pure Ruby and doesn't shell out to either the Git CLI. It might use the C, I believe it uses a C library, so it's not pure Ruby, but it doesn't shell out to like the Git CLI or anything. And that's most interesting because it's the only dependency here that I've had anyone have problems installing. So it's a dependency I might be eventually looking to remove.
They probably get that infamous error building gem native extensions.
Yes,
like probably the one. Yeah,
it's exactly that. And then I have a little thing I can send people to run the right magic commands and maybe get them out of it, but not the best experience in general.
That's always a great Stack Overflow one because you just copy that and go to Stack Overflow. It's everybody always has the same problem with the flags.
Exactly.
There's a question in the chat. Is there a difference between gem install and bundle install? I'll just take a stab at this. So gem install on the command line lets you install a gem locally on your computer. If you're using an environment manager like RBenv or RBenv or RVM, it will install it for that particular environment only, but it will install it into an environment, whether it's your computer or a specific environment. Whereas bundle install only works on that one specific. Maybe you can go at this. What's the best way to explain this? Bundle install only installs it for that one project, whether you're using RBenv or whatever. Gem install is more global, right?
So gem install is a bit more global, but actually they're both in how they install the gems. They're actually both global. I think of it more as a gem install is for installing a single gem, where bundle install is for installing all the dependencies for a project. And I think what you're getting at about it being more local or not is usually when you're using bundler and bundle. And you do bundle install. If you then run things with bundle exec, which is the standard practice to put you in the right environment to access those gems, then you actually only have access to things that were installed via bundle and bundler, which I think is what you're referring to there.
Much more clear than what I was saying. I definitely think that's good. So anyways, Rugged we were talking about. Next one is terminal table.
Yeah, and this is another similar to Colorize, just for outputting on the CLI here. So oops, I didn't want to go back all that way. This output, it's in Sleet help. I think that's where it is. Oh, there's a table in terminal somewhere. We'll find it in code later.
Okay, okay.
And it formats the table, so I don't have to, again, manually do ASCII table formatting in the CLI. And then the last one...
Is Thor like a CLI library?
Yep, exactly. Thor is the CLI library, so it helps parse all my args for me and all that kind of stuff.
So this one's really cool. I just want to spend a second on explaining what Thor is. There's a few different Ruby gems that help you build CLIs, but what I like about any of those gems, not just Thor specifically, is that you don't have to build any of the argument parsing or any of that stuff. You basically just define a command and its subcommands, and then you tell it which methods to run when those commands are triggered and what arguments get passed. It's kind of like a framework for building CLI tools. And it's just really, really easy to use and really straightforward. So I really like using those types of things. It's good to not reinvent the wheel. So let's try to go through the code. So what's the execution path? So you basically showed us in the demo, you run Sleet.
Yep.
And then a file is generated. And so, the part where RSpec reads the file, we get that. We don't need to go through all that.
Yep.
What's actually happening when you run Sleet, and how does your machine know to run that particular, when I run Sleet, how does it know to run the code that you wrote in your gem?
Yep.
And what happens?
Yeah, so while we're in the gem spec, let's start there.
Okay.
So just on line 25 here is where we define the executables. So as a gem, you may or may not have executables. Lots of gems are just frameworks to use by other Ruby code and don't have executables, but Sleet has an executable. So I define it there, and it's in the exe directory, and it's called Sleet. So let's just take a look. And then this is pretty simple. It's got the magic Ruby shebang up top to run Ruby. So this tells it to run this file as a Ruby script. We require Sleet, and then this is the Thor CLI class here, and we tell it to start, and we just pass the args down to Thor, basically.
Yep. So argv is going to contain all the things that the command line, whatever I'm typing in on the command line with your command, that's going to go into Thor's start method. On the first line, the shebang. So I know that when you have a file and it's on your file system and it's executable, if it has a shebang at the top, it's basically the file is passed to that executable, and then that executable interprets the file or runs the file. But what I want to point out here, and I want you to maybe explain a little bit, is why are you doing user bin env Ruby and not like user bin local Ruby, all like a path, or user bin Ruby or user sbin Ruby or something like that?
Yeah, so it's supposed to be an interoperability thing, and it's a trick I've picked up mostly from Bash, and it apparently made its way into here. I'm not 100% sure whether this is like one of those real people are going to have issues, or just there is a made-up machine that wouldn't work kind of Bash issues, because those exist too. But the idea is when you do env first, when you do user bin env, it'll pick up whichever Ruby is on the user, the first one on the user's path. Instead of what might be just at user bin Ruby or whatever hard-coded path might be set. So the idea is to give the user a little bit more freedom of which Ruby is going to run this instead of just the hard-coded Ruby.
So yeah, if you hard-coded it to user local bin and then the user has something like RBEnv installed, user local bin will always run system Ruby, or user bin or whatever, wherever the directory path is. But if you do user bin env space Ruby, that env binary will respect the user's path and run the version of Ruby that they expect it to run. Also, you don't know if every system has Ruby in the same location. Like on Ubuntu or something, they might put it in like user bin Ruby, but on Mac, they might put it like user local bin Ruby or something like that. You never know. Cool. So we start the Thor CLI.
Yep.
And then so Sleet : CLI. That's a class somewhere. It has a method called start. Let's go look at that method and see what it does.
Let's do it. So this is this CLI class. And the first thing to note is that it inherits from Thor here. And this is like the entry point to start building Thor CLIs. And if you'll notice, we will just scroll through quickly. Thor uses kind of a DSL to set up everything. And you'll notice as I scroll down, I don't actually have a start v method. I think it was start or start v. Either one I don't have, just start.
Okay. Well, that's weird. If you're calling a method called start and it's not defined, what's going on here?
Yeah, so I don't define start, but that comes from Thor.
Yep.
So that's kind of the nice thing about Thor is that it'll pick what it calls task that I want to run. And the tasks in Thor are like the subcommands. So for Sleet, we have config, fetch, help, and version.
Config, help, and version. So those are your subcommands. Okay.
Yep. So let's just look at this DSL a little bit. So the main task, and that I have marked as default. So when I actually just ran Sleet, what I was really running was Sleet fetch.
Okay.
And that's just a shorthand because might as well. So let's look at that task here. So I tell Thor that there is a description. The task is called fetch, and give it a little short description. This short description here is what you get when you do Sleet help. So that's the fetch, and then there's the line there. So that is all like kind of free from using Thor, which is really nice and convenient.
Yeah, and what's cool about this is like you don't have to define the help command necessarily, right? Like the help command's built in, so it'll print out all this stuff nice and aligned, and you don't have to spend a bunch of time building CLI plumbing.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think that even gets a little bit cooler when we look at the options that this command takes. And again, we get a lot of this for free. So I get to have some options like source directory, input file, output file, username. And I get to tell it what type we're going to expect back. and Thor's gonna do the conversion for me. I don't 100% know what the error cases are going to be. I think Thor would just blow up if I gave it something that couldn't be a string or something. But I'm using strings, so everything's going to be able to be a string from a CLI.
Yep.
And then you can also define aliases for people who don't want to type out all of sourcedir. They can just type out S now, thanks to this Thor. And then again, some more help output, and we can see that. Oops, not getch, fetch. Oh, see, I guess not. I thought that was going to work, but that's why we get blamed. We learn new things. I thought I could ask for help specifically on the fetch command, but it does not understand my fetch.
Is it Sleet? Is it Sleet fetch help without the dash dash?
Yeah. There's also a decent chance that I just
or Sleet help fetch probably. Sorry, the other way
seems
around.
more right?
Yeah.
Sleet
help fetch. So you're calling the help command and passing it the fetch argument. That should probably do it.
And it does.
There you go.
So
perfect.
Yep.
Which is like the standard practice. Like if you look at the git command and its subcommands, there's like git, git push, right? And then if you do git help push, it'll give you the specific help input or help info for push. So it's generally the command, the subcommand's help, and then what do you want help with?
Yeah, and it's nice to just also lean into something like Thor or a tool that can make that decision for me, so that you can lean into the ecosystem, like you're saying, because that is the standard.
That's what people expect, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so what else? I mean, this is actually what people expect. I think actually when talking about CLI, one big differentiator between like building for the CLI versus building for the web or for a GUI is that there's basically zero discoverability. Like the best thing you can possibly do for discoverability is like tab completion, right? Like I don't think there's much more discoverability in a CLI tool. So like following the practices of what everybody expects really makes it much more usable.
Yeah, it really does. When you have the help, I think the help is probably, besides tab complete, like you mentioned, probably the best discoverability way. So following the conventions that people have for that definitely helps.
Okay, so let's keep going. So there's some commands defined. Anything else in this main CLI class?
So I think the most interesting thing is we can look at some of these other tasks. They're a lot simpler. They take less options, but I think maybe we'll just look at the actual body of the fetch method. This is what happens when we run fetch on a run the fetch task.
Okay.
So yeah, one thing is that you might have noticed is that when I was running Sleet, I did not give it any of the options that we just looked at. I just ran Sleet plain. Yeah. And the reason that works is because I also have a way of reading the config from a file on disk.
Yep.
So that you don't have to write it every time. And this is particularly useful for some of these options that are more project specific, and they actually can get committed to the repo in lots of cases. So
it's stuff like URLs to the Circle CI project and stuff like that.
Yeah. So for example, like the username, the GitHub username of the build, and the GitHub project of the build, the branch of the build. Some of these things can be detected via the Git integration that I mentioned, but these are overwritable to allow for some easier customization that way. Okay, very cool. So let's actually see if I can find, need to look for hidden files, the .sleet.yaml. So I have a
just make sure there's no secrets in there that you don't want to share.
This one's fine. I can't do my home directory.
Okay.
This one just says that it specifies where we want this output file to live. That's spec.rspec example statuses. And it specifies that Sleet is under my username. And then this workflows bit is specific to Circle CI. And it helps us figure out which specific like test run in Circle CI is going to contain your Ruby failures. That comes from a place where in Circle CI, like maybe you have your JavaScript tests and your Ruby tests separate, and you have to point it in the right direction, basically.
So another like aside is whenever I see somebody do something cool on the terminal, I always ask about it. This file output's really cool. Can you tell us about this file output?
Yeah, so this is a tool called BAT. It's a Rust
BAT.
BAT, yes, like cat, but with a B. So it's a Rust tool, and it's built to be basically a cat replacement. And and it does some nice highlighting and line numbers and colors and things like that that you don't get for free or out of the bag with Cat. So it is usually my default. I just want to look at a file in the command line tool.
The thing that I think is cool, I only discovered Bat recently for myself, like within the last year or so. And what's cool about it too is that when you're dealing with standard in, standard out, it performs exactly like Cat. So like you can pipe things into Bat as it was Cat, or you can pipe things out of it, no problem. So I've actually in my terminal gone ahead and aliased Cat to Bat. So whenever I type Cat, it just runs Bat for me, and it looks nice, and everything continues to work. So that's cool. That's a cool one.
Yeah, that's a fun one.
Okay, what else? So you showed the config file. You showed how it reads your config, and then what did it do next?
Yep. So we read the config, and I guess I mentioned this, and we can look at the config. But one thing that it does that I kind of mentioned is it's a recursive. It actually like looks recursively back in directories. So like you gave me the awesome warning about looking for secrets. I have a .sleet.yaml in my home directory that does have a secret. It contains this. Oh, it's actually not in the help because it's not available as a CLI. But you need a Circle CI token. At the end of the day somewhere. And
so what is it? Does it like layer them together to get the full like hash of all the configuration options?
Yep, exactly. Let's take a look at that config class here.
Cool.
But yes, that's exactly what it does. It takes precedence to files that are closer to the current directory, and like layers them on top of each other. So we initialize it with a directory that we want to start searching from, and a hash of options from the CLI that are kind of treated as overrides.
Overrides, yeah.
So from this directory, where do we? There we go. Yeah, so we just take the directory that we're given, and we are trying to find all the parent directories of it, basically. So I'm splitting on a slash here so that we can start chopping things off and work our way up the directory, basically. The idea here is that we're gonna. Oh man, I love not looking at code that I've seen in so long. The idea here is that we're gonna find these paths to search, which are gonna be directories that we might have a sleet.yaml file in. So for example, I'm in users CoreAJA project Sleet, and paths to search here would include users CoreAJA project Sleet, users CoreAJA projects, users CoreAJA, users, and then probably just slash because I don't think it's limited to anything there.
Okay.
Looking at this code, I'm not sure if I would have done exactly how I wrote this to do those file paths.
So what do you potentially not like about the way that you did this?
It's interesting to me that here, this directories kind of is lying to me. When I looked at it, I thought it was going to contain different data than it does. The directories here is going to be an array of directory parts, more or less. So if I started in my Sleet project, I'd have an array of users, Corey, project Sleet.
Yeah.
Which aren't
so like
really
with the name like directories, I'd expect an array of directory objects.
Exactly, or at least strings that looked like directories. Definitely not this.
Yeah.
This directory is lying to me. I like that. So then paths to search is more what I would have expected to be under a directories method. Here's where I'm looking through this and trying to build back up the actual paths to the potential .sleet.yaml files. And I just don't think that it's as clear as it could have been of what these methods are doing here. They're accomplishing the right goal, but I don't usually like using each with index at all. I think indexing into things is just not the cleanest in Ruby. I think it's probably not the best Ruby way to do this.
One of the things I'll ask is about like the fact that this is all basically string manipulation. And so something I would say about this is like, okay, like maybe you're not targeting other operating systems, but if you wanted this to work on a Windows operating system where they don't use forward slashes, they use backslashes, like this would obviously never work. You'd have to refactor this. So if we were targeting multiple operating systems or just generally trying to be like, I don't know what the like if it's correct or not, but like using path objects rather than using a string manipulation. Like I see in Ruby all the time, like path.join, and you put all the parts together and you join them, and like you don't actually write like concatenate with a /. You do like path.join, and it gives you a string with the right separators.
Yeah, I think that's probably what I would opt for now, and I think there's probably ways that I would then be able to like tell it to go up a directory using these objects instead of having to reconstruct the path like I'm trying to do here manually. One interesting tidbit though is you mentioned forward versus backslashes, and the operating systems treating those differently. I don't know if a ton of Ruby people know this, but Ruby actually standardizes that depending. So irregardless of which system you're on, it will work.
I didn't know that.
Which is very interesting.
Is that a new feature, or is that?
I don't think it's super new, but I'm not 100% sure to say when that came out. But it is it does do some of that standardizing for us. But I still agree with I probably wanted some path or file objects here instead of just raw strings for sure.
So anyways, path to search returns something that's usable, which is basically an array of fully qualified paths, right?
Yep.
So it's starting from root. It's an array of strings that represent different paths that you want to search. So that's good enough for us. And then, so what do you do with that?
So then we step up to files, which again, doesn't look like it's actually returning me files and is instead returning me file paths. That's fine, but maybe could be named better. So what I'm doing is I'm looking through all of my paths and selecting the ones that have a file, where a file exists at that name.
Which would be the name of your config file at that path, right?
Yep.
Like, so it's like sleet.config or whatever.
Yep. We added that to the end of the directory here.
I see.
Yep, this is our option file name. Thought it might tell me the actual option. It doesn't matter. Yep. So then we see which ones actually exist, and then from there we create a list of them from an array of them, where the first key is the path, and the second key is
the content of the file, right?
Yep. Either the loaded YAML or we're defaulting to empty hash here for an error case. And
Makes
then
sense.
we can go one step up, and we can reduce these options together. And I think this is a little more complicated than I would have thought potentially necessary. And I think it's because of some of that table stuff that we were, this is where some of that table stuff that we were seeing in the gem spec comes in. We're building up this options hash using this method, which we can find. Build options, where did this go? So this method takes in the source and then the hash of options, and it actually creates a new object. We have a config option object here now that gets the value and then source. And this is all code to support. Let's see if I can do this right. Oh, I didn't mean to run Sleet. That's fine. It's quick. I want to run the config command. There we go. This is where we get the table. And this is where some of this extra option hash stuff is coming in. So the reason for keeping track of this source and piping it into all of these places is so that I could build this nice little config table that gets printed out down here. And
so you can see, like, for example, why your Circle CI token is set. You can see that that's set in your user directory, not in the specific project.
Exactly. And I actually think I built this while I was just trying to debug an issue of figuring out where my options were coming from.
Can I ask, why did you go such a complex route for the accepting multiple configuration files? Why not just have one configuration file that's like global?
Yeah. And I think the reason for that is because I really wanted to be able to put my Circle CI token in my user directory like I have, and then layer on the more specific ones.
So like each project has its own specific Sleet configuration options that need to be overridden. Like, you have to look at this particular project on Circle CI to get the status, right?
Exactly. In particular, the one thing that's that changes the most, or has changed in the projects I've been on the most, is where the output file goes.
Okay.
And that's just because different projects I've seen have different conventions for it for the most part. And it is the one that seems to be, well, I guess workflows is important as well. But yeah, There's definitely some project.
Do you still think this is the way you would approach this now if you were to start over?
I think it might be because I just like the idea of the cascading config. I think I might refactor how we get that, how we build up that config object. But in general, I do like that cascading config. I think it's also fits into, like we were talking about earlier, how people are expecting CLI tools to work. Configs like that are.
I mean, like that's how Git works, right? Like you have your git config .git config file is in your use like in your Etsy folder or something, and that's like global to your machine. Then there's one in your home directory, which is global to your user. Then there's one in each of your Git repositories that's local to that one file or that one project. Same kind of thing. It's like, and they override each other. The thing that I would ask about, just as like a programmer who always likes to optimize things, is this something we could extract out and reuse in other gems? Like, is there a case to be made for doing something like that?
Oh, definitely. I think there definitely could be. I think there's a good bit of the code in this Sleet project that is just around corralling that config. I think I definitely spent a more time on that than other parts for, maybe not the most benefit. I definitely think there's value in extracting this so it could be shared
so
like that.
In the JavaScript space, I built an Electron app, so a desktop app that ran on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And one of the things I had to do is I had to store access tokens between runs. So I had to write out to a config file, and I found a really cool NPM package. I don't know if a Ruby gem exists for this, but I found an NPM package called config or something like that, where you basically had a key value store object that you could write to in process, and it would write it out to disk. And so basically every time the app launched, it would read it in and set all your local configs from whatever was in those files, and then you could write it back out. But it wasn't this cascading stuff. It was just one config file. But like that saved me a lot of time. So I think there would be some utility in something like this, being like a reusable component.
Yeah, definitely. And like to that point, I don't know if I've ever looked specifically for one in Ruby either. So there's a good chance that exists.
It could exist. Okay, so we know how you're reading in your config. We know about what the different commands are. So what's happening? How did we end up in this config file? We were in the main. Yeah.
We're in CLI, which is as close as we have to the main here.
Yeah.
And then so we have an option to print config again. This is because print config can also be run like this. I'm not sure why this exists, but it does. Print config.
So it's like print out the config before you run the actual command, so you can see what's.
Oh, yes, and that's because
that's probably debugging.
Mostly for debugging, and also so because config just reads the files on disk. This can print out the CLI source as well.
Okay.
Cool. Just a little debugging.
What is that?
And then we raise early if there's no token because we got to talk to Circle. And that's just going to end up as not the prettiest, but just an error message in the CLI. Thor is going to handle that for me, so that's nice.
Yeah, so if you raise an exception, Thor just knows exit status. Does it do a non-zero exit status as well?
I believe so. And let's actually really quick. I have a specific error class. Let's see if I made it do anything special. Not too much special. I made it red though.
Okay. Cool.
So
colorize.
There's colorize coming in. I just do .red on the string, and it will make it red in the terminal.
And just to like clarify that, like in case people didn't follow, when I was saying like it probably gives a non-zero exit status. What does that actually? What's that mean? And like why do we care about that?
Yeah, so the exit status is a terminal thing where usually programs will either return 0 or 1, or 0 or non-zero, really. Where 0 means that they exited successfully, and non-zero means usually means there's some kind of error. That's mostly a convention, but again, a good one to follow, I think. So yeah, when we hit this raise here, Thor is going to return, I think, an exit code of 1 or something non-zero to say that it failed.
Cool.
And just for instance, that's what powers my little rocket ship down here. If something fails, it will turn into a different icon.
Oh, really? I haven't seen that. That's a cool terminal hack.
There we go. Now it's poop.
That's great. So, how did you do that? Is that like, are you using some kind of like shell, framework, or did you do that yourself?
So I had a version myself. It's all in the bash prompt. I am using a thing now. It's a Rust tool oh man, I'm gonna forget exactly what the name of the tool is. Oh, spaceships, something spacey is the theme of it. But it does all of the timing I got here, my Ruby versions. It's a nice Rust Bash prompt tool that I found recently.
Yeah, I'm a fan of like customized prompts. I use OMyCSH, which is super slow, but I have an SSD, so it doesn't matter. But like before I got my SSD, it was unbearably slow. I need to like invest some time into rebuilding mine. Okay, so the last thing that it does in this command is it says sleet fetch command.new, and it passes the config and calls the do bang method. So
yeah,
why is it structured this way? And then like let's dig into what it actually does.
Yeah, so we just have a class called fetch command, and I think this is completely custom. So we're not in Thorland anymore. So we're not following anyone else's API. And I think this came from a time when I was having fun with having verbs as my method names. Not sure if there's an amazing reason. It just felt like what I was going to try. So I think this is just a plain Ruby class. Yep, we're not inheriting from anything. This is just Ruby. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure I'd follow exactly this pattern if I did it before. Do bang just doesn't tell me what it's doing much. I guess fetch command, I assume it's fetching when it does do. But I don't think it's very conventional. It's just a fine name, but not an amazing one.
Yeah.
But we pass the config in here, and then this is where we start actually doing stuff and having some logic. So we look at the repo. We look at the repo, and when we're looking at the repo here, we'll look at this Sleet repo class. This is actually going to look at your local repository. So assuming you're checked out and in a repository, we're gonna look for things there. And this is where rugged comes in, like we were talking about earlier when we were looking at the dependencies. If we look in local repo, eventually down here, we'll see some calls to load a rugged repository. And then the job of this is to try to parse out some stuff from the git/rugged output to end up with things that we can actually use to talk to Circle. So for instance, we want to get the GitHub username, the GitHub project, and then we want to get the branch name. So this is one of the pieces of code, like I mentioned before, that I think could probably use some love and some changes. Maybe even potentially just to get rid of the rugged dependency here. When I was writing this, I really wanted to not depend on the Git CLI being available, but I don't know why.
Yeah, because like Git CLI is obviously going to be available if a person's using Git.
Yes, exactly. Like I think it was more of I just for some reason was feeling like I wanted to try being more Ruby specific and not shelling out. But looking back, I think a lot of this could be replaced with just shelling out to the Git CLI.
So I definitely have some opinions about using rugged versus shelling out versus using something else. This is like a very small app. It's a CLI app, which means that after you run the CLI, it exits. Yep. The problem with using shelling out to the Git CLI is, one is security. You could, you might let them run like arbitrary code execution on your machine, which is not good. But like, again, this CLI app, you're kind of in a trusted space. But if you're in a long running like web process, let's say, you don't want to allow that. The other thing is that the Git command line tool is not optimized for memory leaks, because you run the Git command and it quits and all memory is immediately freed. So if you're running this in a long running process and you shell out to the Git CLI, it can allocate memory that never gets deallocated and you end up with memory leaks. So shelling out to the Git CLI can be problematic if it's part of a long running process. And then with rugged, I think rugged is fine. But there's an alternative that I would consider, which is called libgit2. And it's most likely that libgit2 did not exist at the time when you were doing this. Rugged was like kind of the original Ruby interface with Git, and then libgit2 is a reimplementation of Git. So you can use libgit2, and libgit2 exists. Basically, it's two components. There's the language bindings, so there's like libgit2 Ruby bindings, but then there's like libgit2 the implementation in C, and so you can have like Go bindings or whatever, Java bindings or whatever for libgit2, and it reimplements all the commands of Git without touching the Git binary, but it's all done in a memory efficient way that doesn't cause memory leaks and doesn't have security issues. Assuming like hopefully doesn't have security issues.
Yes, hopefully.
But like again, all that stuff is like not relevant to us because this command runs for less than 2 seconds next. So like it doesn't really matter. I think it's safe to assume that Git's there.
Yeah. I think it's safe to assume the Git CLI is here. I hadn't actually thought or knew about the memory issues. Just hadn't thought about the CLI not being memory optimized in that way. So that's a good call out for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it like again, it doesn't really matter. Like the only context I have on that is like I used to work at GitHub and we used to use Rugged, and we used to, like they basically I think they wrote Rugged. The original like authors were like at GitHub, but they had to rewrite everything because it was causing like issues with our long running web processes that were accessing Git repositories. Anyways,
that's really interesting context.
Yeah. So it's really cool. Okay, so then we're able to get the user info, figure that stuff out. You're kind of wrapping the Git commands around something else, which you might not do the same way now if you were to start over. You just probably shell out to Git. That's good enough. Yeah. Probably still wrap your shelling out to Git in some kind of a helper class though, right? Like have some kind of a library.
I think that's slightly why this local repo class exists, as in it's the thing that has Rugged as private API here. And in theory could be subbed out for a different implementation.
So this is something that I spend a lot of time talking with developers about, is the idea of abstraction. And it's one thing to be learning how to code. It's another thing to learn how to like make good applications and learn good design practices. And every person I've ever worked with, like by the time I stop, like they go on and like get their first job or something, they're like, John's catchphrase is abstraction. Like abstraction. Can you talk to me about like what are your opinions on abstraction, and like how do you kind of make the balance between when to make something abstracted and when to just like not care about it?
Yeah, so I think I agree. I think that like learning the abstractions is really important in learning to code. And I usually, especially in personal projects like this, I probably would tend to be on the things are probably over abstracted, if anything, on my personal type projects. Like for instance, in this, I have repo, and I have local repo. They probably are small enough they could be one thing, but I liked the separation of concerns that it gave me to talk about them differently. So like I liked having local repo be the thing that talks to or looks at my local file system and then uses Rugged privately. I purposely wrote it so that Rugged, nothing is directly talking to Rugged in the public interface. It's all wrapped up to create that abstraction to maybe one day move Rugged out.
So then you can replace it more easily.
Yep. And then the same idea with repo. I think they started, we could actually Git blame this and find out, but I think the repo and local repo started as the same thing, but I think I created repo really just to be that layer of abstraction. As you can see, it's pretty thin and doesn't do a whole lot itself. But I liked the idea of having something that represented a repository in the abstract and not necessarily the physical local repository on my machine.
Yeah, I think in personal projects, it can happen that developers over abstract because they have like big ambitions, but then ultimately don't get to put as much time into it. But if it was like a project for work, these kinds of abstraction was probably the right level because you're going to continue to add and continue to add and continue to add for a long time. And it just makes life easier as you go. I want to pause for a second and just address a couple of things that came in via chat. So somebody said the tool we're talking about for your command line, was it called starship.rs? Is
that sounds right, starship.rs. Yeah.
So that's if you want to like check out this command line tool, you can go check that out. And then we also had a question quite a while ago, but I want to address it. Is it compulsory to have a gem file and a gem spec like it is in Node, or is it optional? And I think we kind of covered a little bit about the differences, but maybe we can just reiterate like when is one required and when is the other required? Yeah.
So a gem file is required for when you're using Bundler, whether you're writing an application or a gem. The gem spec file is only needed if you're writing a gem to be published or not, a gem that's not an application.
Yeah. And so like if you use Bundler, what's happening is it looks at your gem file and it installs the dependencies for that gem file. So you might have a project, let's call it like your company's website or your company's app, and you run bundle install, it will look at the gem file in your main project root and will install all those dependencies. Each of those dependencies is a gem, and inside of each of those gems, there's a gem spec and the gem spec specifies what dependencies that gem has, and bundler will then go and like recursively fetch all of those things for you. And if you're publishing a gem, you need to include a gem spec so that your consumer, your end user of that gem, will fetch all the right stuff. Let me see if there are any. I don't think there's anything else in here. So we got the local repo stuff. So when does the fetch command actually like talk to Circle CI and figure out what failed, and how does it figure that stuff out?
Yeah, so that's we see the beginnings of that here in some of these methods, where we start getting into branches and builds. So let's look. Ooh, man, I'm actually not sure why we have two separate things for a branch and a build. So let's learn together. So we don't pass one to the other. So they're separate. I was wondering if I passed branch into build or the other way around, but that doesn't appear to be the case. Okay, so here's where we're going to actually talk to some Circle CI. Oh, okay. I remember what this does a little bit more now. Okay, so this is, let's step back a bit, but I have some more context now. We were in fetch command and we made it to the fetchers. How did we make it to build? Ooh, that's a fun question. Trying to figure out where we landed to get us here. Okay, let's just start from fetch then. Okay, so in Circle CI, this is a bit specific, and actually let's just look at their UI for a second. So
text size is super small, so if you can zoom this, it would be.
Thank you. Thanks for the reminder.
Yep.
Okay, so this is Circle CI's view. And right now, a lot of this code is pretty specific, or at least the code we're talking about right now is pretty specific to Circle CI and how they organize their test runs. So for example, we're on my branch, this demo branch, and we have workflows. I only have one workflow called test workflow, the workflow to run my tests. And then under that, this is a hierarchy here. Under test workflow, there's a build called test. So that's just orienting ourselves there a tiny bit.
And the 35 and 36, are those separate branches? Why are there two there?
Yep. So they are not separate branches. We're looking at one branch right now. These are separate runs of the pipeline. And in this case, it's for separate commits.
I see. Okay. So each commit or each time the build is triggered, you get one of those. Yep.
So a workflow defines what like jobs there are, and a pipeline instance is one run of a workflow. Okay. So that's some terminology things. So from the config, one of the things that we have is the structure of the workflow. So we know that we're looking for a job named test, and the file that we're looking for in that job is named rspec spec.rspec example statuses. And then here's some code that I kind of forgot about and that I can probably clean up nowadays. This whole thing was written before Circle CI 2.0. If you're familiar with Circle CI at all, that's when it introduced this workflow hierarchy. Before that, you just had like more one job per commit, and now they've given it more structure. But we have some code here that handles the V1 version of Circle CI that I think I could probably safely say isn't that necessary anymore. I personally don't have any projects that are still using that. So there's some interesting legacy code here that says sometimes there'll be a nil workflow name, and we just map it to an output file. So a lot of the config is actually overly complicated by trying to support two different versions of Circle CI, which could probably use some love. Looking back at this now, I maybe could have cut a new gem release focusing just on 2.0 and moving on, because I don't actually have projects that are going back and forth between version 1 and 2 of Circle or anything like that. Then eventually we make it into job fetcher. Actually going to find the right thing and make that file for us. So let's find, we have build selector, which looks for that job name and the repo we're given. And this is where we're actually going to hit some Circle CI things. So we know our job name, and we're going to look for a build for the chosen build number. So we have to find a build number, and we're looking for a number like 288. That's that number there.
Does that map to like a commit that triggered it in some way?
Yes, through some hierarchy.
Okay.
288 is the test run for the workflow. So like here, test there could be multiple things. I only have test in this project. I could have like Ruby test and JS test, and they'd map both to this same commit.
I see.
So we want to find the right one. And all of this started because I was at a place where we had a mono repo of Ruby apps. We had lots of Rails apps in a mono repo. So like we'd have a directory for each Rails app, like the main app and then like the admin app. And I wanted to grab the correct tests for the correct thing we were working on when there were multiple.
Yep.
So we have to choose a build, and what we're actually looking for is in Circle CI, you have a way to upload artifacts. So this also requires some Circle CI setup to be just a little bit configured. So in Circle CI, we're telling it to store this file specifically in that little artifacts blob, and that just gives us a place to download it from later.
So it's like the container runs the tests inside the container, the file gets written, and then the artifacts basically like after the container's finished, it copies that thing out to something that Circle CI exposes to you. Yep,
exactly. So we're looking for, let's go back to the code here. In build selector, we're looking for a build with artifacts, which I guess is not in this place, but that's okay. We could go to branch. So here's actually hitting some Circle CI. So we just have this Circle CI URL down here that's saying we're going to look for a project on GitHub with this username in this repo. And here's the branch we want. We want to look for completed builds and show us as many on one page as we can, which I believe was 30 or was 100. It increased from 30 at some point.
Okay.
So then we're going to look for ones that have artifacts. They just have a little flag for me that says whether they have artifacts. So that's nifty. So we want it to have artifacts. We want it to be in a workflow that has the right name. And
that name comes from your config as well, right?
Yep. That's going to be this test here from the config. So we're going to look for that. And then we do just a little bit of validation here. If we chose, if test didn't have any artifacts, we'd tell you that there was no file found in the latest build with artifacts. Or if there weren't any builds, you get this other error message, no builds with artifacts found, which is just some nice error messaging there. But then once we've chosen a build, we can actually ask for it from Circle. We can, branch. Within repo.build for. We just create a build. I guess I didn't need to hop through that. It's just a getter, essentially. And then here, again, is where we talk to Circle to actually get the artifacts. So we use the build number, grab the artifacts, and then the artifacts is a JSON response, and we're going to parse that. So one thing that I'm noticing as we're looking at these actual Circle calls is there is no, I kind of centralized calling to Circle in a Circle CI class here, but the URLs are kind of just sprinkled wherever they happen to need be. Yep. And I think I would change that. I also don't love that this is a required singleton, but I guess I'm not using singleton. I don't like that these are class methods.
Yeah. Talk to me about that. That's actually something I have preferences about. And I used to do this thing where I would make a class and put a bunch of class methods on it for like my API wrappers. And then I changed my style.
Yeah.
So talk to me about your preferences when you're doing this.
Yeah, I think I prefer having like right now I'd probably create like a Circle CI client class or object maybe that was instantiated probably with the token in this case, since that looks like it's all that needs. And then I think I'd probably have some methods on it for hitting the different endpoints. Like probably a method to hit this artifacts, taking in these parameters. I like having objects in Ruby. So I usually try to stay away from these class methods, the self.get and self.connection.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I would probably create like a little client object that I could pass around instead of trying to use class methods here.
Yeah, I can't really articulate why I like that better. But over time, over the years, like I used to do this thing where I'd like make a class and put a bunch of class methods on. I think it was because my understanding it was easier for me to just understand like, okay, I have this method, it knows what to do. But really making a class that you can have an instance of is equally easy. You just need to make an initialize method, and then it can store instance variables. It's like so much more, like you don't have to send in it's less arguments. I think that's what it is. It's like every single class method, you have to duplicate your arguments every time because there's no persistence of the instance. But with a client, for example, if you have a client that you can instantiate, you pass in the token, store it in an instance variable, then you can make lots of repeated calls to that client, and you don't have to pass in the token every single time or read from an environment variable every single time or something like that.
Yeah, I agree. I like that. And I also just think that it feels nice in Ruby to pass around an instance rather than talking to the class.
Yeah.
Not for any particular reason.
Oh, you know what else? I think there's another reason why passing around an instance is better. Because in Ruby, you have this concept of like, the idea of duck typing, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you pass an object and it responds to a method you're calling, say, for example, 2s, right? If an object responds to 2s, anything that calls 2s like can accept any object as long as it responds to the method that's required. And when you have a client like this, when you're calling a class name, you're basically hard coding a dependency on that class. Whereas if you have an instance, you can pass a variable containing in the instance. And if you change the class of that instance, it doesn't matter as long as it has a fetch method, right? Or whatever the method's called. And so over time you can replace, there's a term for this in what do they call it? It's design patterns. I think it's dependency injection is the term. So the idea of rather than depend on a class directly, you depend on the class's interface and you pass in an object that conforms to that interface, and you don't have to like have a hard dependency on the class itself. I might be butchering a little bit of that like design pattern stuff. It's a little bit more on the theoretical side than the practical. But
that was a great overview from my point of view, at least.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that I might be butchering a part about like tying it to the interface. Like one of the things that you're supposed to be able to get out of dependency injection is when you pass in the thing, it's like changing the way it's configured is possible through dependency injection more easily. And I couldn't articulate it very, very well how that's supposed to work, but it's something along those lines. If you're really interested in this, Google dependency injection, go on YouTube and watch a video about dependency injection. My main point though is don't overlearn design patterns and just try to force every single design pattern in here. I think like kind of an interesting thing is like on line 3, you're requiring singleton. Like singleton is a basic design pattern. And like, I wonder if it's like, relevant in this case, or if it was just more of a, like, I'm doing this because this is what I learned how to do in school.
I also wonder that same thing. And I also wonder if it was a singleton at one point.
Oh yeah, maybe it changed. Yeah.
It might have been. Yep, it was a singleton. Look at that.
Okay, and you just forgot to remove that line.
And I guess the require never made it away.
Yeah.
But just to talk about that a little bit, I definitely like the duck typing in Ruby. That's one of my favorite things about Ruby. And this piece of code isn't the perfect example, but I think if we blurred our eyes a little bit, we could pretend that this integrated with another environment, like maybe a Travis instead of Circle. And if the interface was written nice, we could just, like you were saying, flip out the Travis versus the Circle class, and if the interface is right, everything will just work. Which is
this is kind of a downside of Ruby. So when I was first getting into software development, I loved Ruby because it was so forgiving. Like you don't have to know how to define an interface up front to have an interface. You just kind of like, if they have the same method, they have a shared interface. Like you could have a 50% compatible interface if you want. But the downside to that is like you have no static analysis, no static checking where you know that you're following. And like the flip side is like Java, right? Like Java, everything's an interface and you have to define it all up front. You have to be like very, very like verbose about everything. But I think that the thing with Ruby, it's like is a disadvantage is like you don't have a way to just say like this is an interface and everything. Like the closest thing I've done in Ruby to having an interface is like I'll make a parent class with a bunch of methods defined that raise a method undefined error. And if you don't implement those methods, then you get an error, and it's almost like you have an interface.
Yep, I like that. That style I like as well. I've actually been playing with Sorbet a bit recently, which is the Ruby type checking system that is being played with.
Tell me all about it, because I don't know anything about this.
Yeah, so it's Sorbet is the thing. It's a relatively new thing, so it's gaining a bit of traction as typing in general is gaining traction. It feels like, but it's trying to. I'm not using it in this project to actually look at it here, but it tries to sit on top of Ruby and add some typing to it. And one of the things it actually has support for is interfaces like that, where it'll check. Well, there's no compile time, but at lint time or whatever, it'll check to make sure you've satisfied that interface and things like that.
Pre-processing time, probably before, like the scan ahead before it actually interprets it, like executes the code.
Well, yeah. So there's actually two parts of Sorbet. There's a static part, which is just they have a CLI that you run and statically
kind of like a linter or something.
Exactly, and then they also have a runtime component that is optional that will then actually blow up at you if you're not following your interfaces nicely or whatever.
Kind of like how JavaScript has TypeScript.
Yes, exactly. Similar ideas for sure.
It's like everything is like, eating its own tail. It's like, typing is not a new thing. Like, let's just be like clear. Like typing was like an original, like, OOP like kind of concept. And then we like got away from it because it was too hard. And like, now we're like, oh, let's go back because it has lots of benefits. I'm really a fan of the Swift programming language right now I'm getting into. And like, I like that it has some things that remind me of like Ruby in the sense that like you can do introspection on classes. You can, it's basically all message passing. And so there's, not as much of a hard requirement, but it's like fully typed. So you can either pass an object and declare its type, or you can pass an object and declare that the object is any type of object. So it's like, this object will always be an object of type person, or this object will always be an object. It could be any object, and you have to deal with it. Like, so it's like optional typing, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's interesting. What's funny is the two languages I'm doing the most, at least for personal projects, are Ruby and Rust. So I get slightly opposite ends of that spectrum sometimes.
Yeah. Cool. Well, okay. So we could imagine that you could make this work with like Travis or whatever if we follow this kind of like abstraction idea. But anyways, you're basically saying like you don't like that there's URLs all over the place, and you try to centralize them and kind of clean that up. Yeah. But it is what it is. It works, right? So
it works.
The best code is code that works.
Exactly. I agree with that.
What else do we need to see in here? So it's able to like basically find the build on Circle CI, and then it fetches that artifact. So where does it fetch the artifact, and then what does it do with the artifact before it creates that file? Yeah.
So the one thing that we actually haven't mentioned yet, but is actually one of the reasons that this exists, and you kind of actually did mention it off the cuff earlier, is about parallelizing builds.
Okay.
I only have one turned on right now, but maybe I can change that. If I go to my Circle config, let's change this real quick. This will be a good demo. Let's just change this to 2. What I'm going to do here is have this run in 2 containers instead of 1. And that's where Sleet actually shines, is in that it actually gives us the ability to combine multiple artifacts together. So we'll look at the code while this is building in the background. So we found some artifacts. And we have some URLs for where we can download those artifacts. And that comes from the artifacts method here. Mm-hmm. So we're looking to, come on, Tim. We're going to look for the artifacts. So we're going to look for ones that have a path that looks like the right file name, that ends with the file name we're looking for. Ends with is important here because Circle CI has some pathing at the beginning just for where it stores the artifacts and stuff. So we look for the right type of artifacts. We get the URL for each type of artifact. And then we just download them and get the body because these are actually just the straight artifact files. And
so then you have an array of bodies, right?
So I have an array of bodies. And that's to support the multiple case, which is probably still running, but that's okay. So we have an array of bodies. And now we just need to stuff them together. So we have the RSpec file merger, which takes in some files from those bodies before, maps over them, and tells RSpec core. So this is where I'm reaching into RSpec to take advantage of some of their code. This is almost 100% not public API, and RSpec could change this on me at any point. But so far, so good. It's definitely not like I just dug through the RSpec code and found.
I think that the idea, like, I think that they're not likely to change it very like.
That's it. Well, it's been 2 years since I wrote this code, and it hasn't changed yet. So I think it's relatively stable, even if it's private.
Yeah.
So luckily, they actually gave me a really nice API where I can parse a file, and it'll give me an array of example statuses back. So like one object per example with the status, the file name, and time. So I can create one flat array of all the statuses, and then again dump them back out to RSpec with a sorting step in the middle, mostly for looking nice.
So the sorting is just so that they're like, so for example, you could run this in parallel. It randomly selects some tests go to some worker, some tests go to another worker. They both output a mismatch of, some tests from each side. You put them all together in one array and sort them, and then you print them out as if they ran on one worker.
Yep, that's exactly the idea here.
And then the last step of this is that it would save to disk.
Yep, and let's find out exactly where that lives. But yes, that is exactly what is going. Oh, there we go. So we eventually call into create output file from combined file, which is my merger.output, and we write it back to disk.
And then you output that nice helpful message in green that tells everybody it worked.
Yep.
Cool.
And that's about it.
That's pretty much the whole thing. I mean, there's other commands in here that are about like help and config and whatnot, but that's like the main happy path of using the application. Really, really cool. I think we learned a lot about kind of your mindset and how you were going after this stuff, some things that we could change.
Yeah.
I guess, if you're on the stream and you have any questions before we move on from this, feel free to just drop them in the chat. We can ask Corey about any of your questions. But I guess, what's the future of Sleet?
Yeah, so it's been doing great. I think there's a bright future. One thing I'd like to add is that we talked about a little bit is support for other CI environments besides Circle CI. I think that would be really, really beneficial. But for the most part, I don't have any. Sleet's is in maintenance mode. Besides that, I'm actually only using Circle CI at the moment, so I don't have a intrinsic motivation to
scratch your
support.
Own itch, right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't have a intrinsic motivation to add another provider, but would love to see that added or help in getting that added.
And how are you seeing like Sleet being used? Are other people using it? Are you getting like feedback? Are you getting issues? What's the situation? Because it's open source, so like what are you seeing from the community?
It's open source, so I've seen a little bit of traction, mostly at my previous employer, where I showed it to people and got some traction there. And I think people are using it at my current job too. So most of the contributions and issues I've seen have been from people, in my network that I know who are using it. But it's still always fun to see those usages. And I think even in the last probably year and a half, I've had more contributors that weren't me to the project. Most other people have been doing PRs, which is really fun to see.
What's your philosophy on like allowing contributions from random people on the internet? Like how do you approach like when somebody sends a feature request or something like that?
Yeah, so for feature requests, I always try to respond positively to them, but also put it out there that it might not be my priority, but I'd love your help if it is your priority. So I've done that on many issues, but I'm very happy when I just get some to look at PRs. I've gotten some PRs from different people, and I'm always very happy to review them, add features and bug fixes there. So for this, it's been really awesome to have other people chiming in and helping out.
Are there any other people that are helping review pull requests, or is it just you?
Just me at the moment. So yeah.
Just from the chat, I have a couple of things that came in. Angel from Circle CI suggested that the build metrics be supported in the future. I don't know if you have a need for that, but that's probably another cool feature you could think about. And then I also wanted to say Punk Data. Sorry about the mod, the auto mod, giving you a hard time. But we're working on it. Joe can help you out. Okay, cool. So I don't think we had any other questions from the audience. If it's all right with you, I know we were planning on talking about one more of your projects. We don't have to go into super detail like we did with this one. Maybe we can spend 5-10 minutes just talking about what it is.
Yeah.
And then, just kind of get an overview about like why you're working on it now. So we looked at something that you used to work on. Presumably you still use it, but you're, like you said, in maintenance mode. But what are you working on now in open source?
Yeah, so let's take a look at my other project that I have here that I've been working on a little more recently. Make that go away. So the other one that I have that I want to talk about is dev icon lookup. And we'll do a more overview here, but this one needs a little bit better README, but this picture will give us a quick look at it. So the idea is to add these little file icons next to some file names. Where I actually use this, and we can see, is in Vim. I have this nice fuzzy file selector that I use. And this on the left here, you see the different icons for different file types. Like Markdown has this arrow, Rust has a Rust symbol, and stuff like that. And dev icon lookup is a tool that I built to. It's what's powering this that we're looking at right now. Actually adding these icons to the files here. So I think I want to just talk about like the evolution of this project, because I think it's a little bit of a fun story. So this is powered. The fuzzy searching here is powered by a tool called FCF. Which is a fuzzy finder that I really am in love with and try to using for all kinds of things. And it gives you a nice fuzzy finding and search capabilities and stuff like that. So I was working with FCF, and I actually built a little thing that uses FCF for spell checking. So like I can ask it to spell check a word, and it's like, oh, okay, here's all the things you might have wanted, and I can accept an answer. Cool. So that's what I was building initially before I even knew about dev icons. And I was talking to someone on the internet who really thought FCF was cool as well, and introduced me to this repo for adding dev icons to things all over Vim. So dev icons is like kind of the general name for these little file type icons. And this plugin integrates with a whole slew of other ones to add the dev icons. For example, I have them over here now too. They're all over the place. But one thing it didn't have support for is FCF. There was an open issue for it, but it hadn't been added yet. And I found this one day, and the people in this thread here have some good answers. They figured out a way to do it. They wrote some custom code that added it to the FCF, and allowed us to use the dev icons. But the one thing that when I found it down here somewhere, is that it does it all. All of these solutions are written in Vim. They're all Vim script.
Yep.
And one of the things about FCF that I really, really like is that it's a streaming search. So if you look here, it was too quick to actually watch. But the amount of files that it searched goes up as it's searching through files. So I can see results even as it's still looking through my file system, which in large directories I found to be really, really helpful. And I realized this version that was in these comments here didn't support streaming. You had to wait for the full list of files to come back from FCF to then loop through in Vim and add icons. And I just found this really slow in practice in large directories that I was searching through. So the idea for dev icon, the project was born, where I really just wanted to figure out a way to make this faster and support FCF streaming. And what I actually did is I ended up writing a Rust tool. Oh, my blog post 404s. That's unfortunate. But I ended up writing a Rust tool to sit in the middle between FCF and Vim here to allow this to happen in real time and be streaming. So all the Rust tool does is takes in some file names over standard in, prepends the icon, and outputs it to standard out. So it's actually like a really pretty simple tool for what it does. But it was really fun for me. This was one of my first learning experiences with Rust. I wasn't super familiar with it. And it was a really fun example. I wrote a demo of it in Bash at one point to try it out, to like kind of proof point this. And it worked great. But I was able to get about a 10 times speed increase by porting this to Rust instead of using my Bash implementation, which was just really fun. And I liked how just the evolution of it from a fun idea in a GitHub issue all the way through to now I have this Rust open source project that has got a few number of stars here. We've got some people who are using it.
You have
so
7 contributors too, so other people are contributing.
Yeah, we've got some people have added some new icons for us. We've got some bug fixes and stuff in there. But yeah.
Why did you choose Rust for this? You said speed was one reason. Any other reasons?
Not any great technical reasons. It was very interesting to me. And it still is. It was just a language.
Which is totally fine. Like learning, you need a project to do something, and if it's useful, that's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. So there wasn't any like super compelling reason to choose Rust over other options, but it was one that I had been wanting to learn for a while, and took this as an opportunity to do that.
Excellent. Well, yeah. Anything else that you wanted to add, or is that all?
No, I think that's about it.
Okay. Well, thank you for showing DevIcon with us. Again, in the chat, if you have any questions about DevIcon, we can take those before we wrap up. Otherwise, I would just say, do you have any like kind of parting advice or thoughts for people who are getting into software development, or not really like just learning how to code, but like trying to advance in their careers? Like what has been most helpful to you as a developer?
I really think that these small projects have been really helpful for me in just being able to explore and learn new things. And personally, I find that I do that a lot better when it's something that I have a use for, as in these two tools. They helped my workflow, and I learned a lot, and I also still use them today. So that's what's worked for me personally. I'm not saying it'll necessarily work for everyone, but I like building things that I get to use. It's helped me learn a lot in my career for sure.
And there's also somebody asking in the chat, Baby Groot Cat, what level of experience do you think someone would need to be a contributor to your projects? So either to DevIcon or to Sleet. Do you think that they need to have a lot of experience, or are there kind of low-hanging fruit that would be good entry points for them?
In DevIcon Lookup, you're probably going to have more Rust experience than me. So I'm going to go with not very much Rust experience for DevIcon Lookup for sure. On the Ruby side for Sleet, I definitely don't think it requires a super senior person to understand. It's a relatively small tool, all things considered. And I definitely think there's some low-hanging fruit that can be done there, even in just like some of the refactoring things we talked about today, or things like that. So I think it would be a great place to see some new contributors in for sure. I'd love to have you guys.
And then the last thing I'll just say is, when it comes to like larger open source projects, just because a project is large doesn't mean you need to have a lot of experience to work on it. Oftentimes, the very big projects will be well organized. So I'm a Ruby developer. I like Rails. Contributing to the Rails projects shouldn't be scary. Sure, there's a lot of like really, really talented people there, and maybe there are some issues that are out of your reach. Like you shouldn't be trying to like add a new kind of like crazy feature to Active Record or something. But if you find a bug and it's a really, really weird edge case, writing an issue that like details the reproduction steps and being like the person who uncovers that, and then potentially like submitting a failing test case can be a really good way to contribute as well. So it's not just like only contribute to small projects. It's just like try to find something that you have a lot of expertise on, or you have experience. Like not even that you're an expert coder on it, but just like it affects you in a way that it doesn't affect other people, and you can contribute that way. But yeah, so thank you so much for the questions, everybody. Thank you, Corey, for joining us. This has been really fun. We'd love to have you back sometime in the future. Anytime, feel free to just let us know.
Thanks for having me.
I guess
it's been a great.
I guess the kind of wrap up is, our mission is to help every developer advance their career. If you are a developer and you want to move forward, or if you want to help somebody else, come check out raise.dev. And we'd love to have you in the community, helping each other out. You'll get to meet people like Corey, who care a lot about open source, who care about coding, who want to teach you, want to help you. And it's really just meant to be a supportive community. So thank you again, Corey, for joining us. I hope you have a good rest of your day. And yeah, we'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. It's been great.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, John. Thank you, Corey. That was awesome. I hope you all enjoyed it. I feel like we got really inside Sleet and saw everything we could see. That was awesome. And thank you for everyone participating in chat. Chat's been booming tonight. That's been great. So a couple of things for you all before we end the show tonight. I said this is our last show for the night. Last show for the day, rather. Last show for the week, in fact. We're not streaming over the weekend. Let me give you all of the schedule for what's happening next week. So next week, we have a full schedule, 15 shows. We had one guest drop out, and they were instantly replaced. We're that packed next week. So let me run you through that schedule. So Monday, 3 shows on Monday. First up, Tanya Allard from Microsoft. Ian Jennings, he's a developer experience consultant, super cool guy. Hopefully we'll get to see, he works on this really cool project to help with developer experience. Developer experience, if you haven't encountered it, is the concept of, like companies that have developer facing products, making those products as nice for developers to use as possible. So Ian Jennings is the man for that, and he'll be with us on Monday. Then the last show of Monday is Michelle Mannering, developer advocate for GitHub in Australia. Michelle will be with us at the end of Monday. Tuesday, Prince Wilson. I don't know if any of the corgis are here, but the Prince Wilson will be with us. Hopefully we'll have a party corgi raid. Prince is at, I always forget. One second. Prince works on a lot of really awesome educational things. He's a wonderful teacher, and now he's at New Seller. There we go. Next up is Dev2. So Dev2 is a wonderful community site. Their engineer, Nick, and their head of open source community, Christina, are taking over the show on Tuesday to work on Forum. That'll be another accessibility show. They'll be working on Forum, the Ruby on Rails app that runs Dev2, and doing some live programming on Forum. That's their show on Tuesday. They take over. They send us packing, and they take over the show and have a really good time. So that'll be great. The last show of Tuesday is with Marcin from the Enzo project. Baby Group Cat, it is all on Twitch. It's all on this channel. You can drop us a follow here, and you'll get notifications when these go live. And over the weekend, I'll update the schedule. So I didn't put the link up because right now the schedule is irrelevant. But over the weekend, this schedule will have the proper shows on it. So keep an eye on that over the weekend. I'll get it updated as soon as possible. So yeah, the last show on Tuesday is... Oh, and thank you... Audrey the Code Witch for dropping me New Seller. So yeah, last show on Tuesday is Marcin from Enzo. Enzo's a really cool visual programming language for data scientists. It's up and coming. That's going to be a really interesting show because Enzo has basically had a completely new code base in the last 6 months. So we're going to be talking a lot about the struggles of maintainers moving from one code base to another. That'll be fun. Very similar to Corey's struggles with that Bash to Rust code change there. Shreyas has already dropped a spoiler in the chat for this one. Wednesday, we have Matt Cowley back again. Matt Cowley is the community platform manager for DigitalOcean. He's been working a lot on Hacktoberfest, so a lot of y'all in the chat have met him in the Hacktoberfest Discord. We had him last Wednesday talking about his work on Hacktoberfest. The other thing he works on, because he's not busy enough, is CDNJS, which is a content distribution network. That's what it stands for, isn't it? He works on that as well. He's a maintainer of CDNJS, so he'll be back with us on Wednesday. Then it's Ramon, who's a new addition. Ramon's a Ruby programmer. You may have seen Ramon wearing a lovely sailor hat from the Eurocode conference. He's with us on Wednesday. We don't know what we're doing yet. That's literally got booked in today. We'll work that out and let you know as soon as we can. Then Angel's been in the chat. Angel, are you still here? Punk Data. Angel from Circle CI is with us Wednesday evening. We're going to get into all things CI. So if you enjoyed looking through Sleet today and you had some questions about those CI concepts that Corey was talking about, Angel's got you covered. He's coming back to us Wednesday. Thursday. Oh, he's still here. He's in chat. Excellent. He's now VIP. The bot bullied him so much I prematurely VIP'd him. So on Wednesday he'll be able to post all the links he wants. Thursday we've got Guanluca from Equinix Metal. Guanluca is Rain's colleague. If you enjoyed our show with Rain a couple of weeks ago, you will enjoy our show with Guanluca on Thursday morning. Nathaniel from Twilio is next up on Thursday. Again, we don't know what we're doing, Nathaniel, yet. I believe we're getting that sorted over the weekend. And then we've got Sam Lanning, who used to work with us at GitHub. They were an engineer at Semel, which was like a query language for like security things on code. They got acquired by GitHub, and now he's at the UN. So I'm really excited to hear about Sam's new role and what they're up to nowadays. Friday, we have Nicholas Carrigan. who has been in chat. I think he's still in chat. Oh, sorry, user temporary suspended. I was very caught up in my calendar, so I didn't see your invite for the Discord server. Thank you, John, for getting us on that. So Friday with Nicholas Carrigan himself, who's a big, well-known on the Hacktoberfest Discord now for answering almost as many questions as Matt, and has been hanging out with us on chat in chat all week. I'm very excited to meet the man in person. We've got Eddie. Eddie was our first show of the Hacktoberfest help desk, what feels like a millennia ago now. And Eddie is, he calls himself an open source advocate, and what he spends his full time doing is helping people get into open source. He has a really amazing YouTube channel and a really amazing stream. He's been super busy this Hacktoberfest doing all kinds of wild things to help people make their contributions. So we're having him back on the show to talk about how Hacktoberfest has been for him and get a kind of summary, take a step back, reflect on the month. So that's going to be super fun. And then the last show of Hacktoberfest of this stream, Friday night, is with our very own Chris Ewald. Chris is a developer here. He's a coach here. He's been a coach here since the pilot program. If you watched our shows with the Rust alumni, we've had Free now, we've had Ching Ching, we've had Sukrit, and we've had Frida. You have no doubt heard of Chris and his pair programming and his teaching. He is coming to share that love with us as our last show, Hacktoberfest. And very appropriately, he's going to be diving into the Hacktoberfest code base, which he worked on with Raise.dev last year. So that is all our shows. Corey's in the chat. We've got a party in the chat. So that's all of our shows for next week. As I said, we'll update that schedule over the weekend. If you want to get notified when we go live, follow us here on Twitch, hit the little love heart, then hit the bell. It is a two-stage process. Make sure you get those notifications. Or you can follow us on Twitter at RaiseDevs, where we tweet at least an hour before every show, and we also tweet the full schedule each day as well. So that's everything from me. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. We are not streaming this weekend. We will be back on Monday. Enjoy the weekend. I hope we see you next week. Have a wonderful and relaxing time. And if you're hacking away over the weekend, oh, thanks, Baby Groot Cat, for all of the bits and all of the cheers. It's been wonderful to meet you. Thank you for coming by. Oh, yeah, sorry, actually, that's a good point. Lots of you asked questions about Raise Dev, and I got completely distracted. If you haven't heard of us, as John's been saying in the chat, and as John said at the end of his section, we are a new service currently in early access. We're here to help you level up and get the experience you need to move to where you want to be with your developer career, where it's getting your first job or transitioning. John spoke at the beginning of his section about like doing a lot of coding interviews and helping people through that. I guess what you've just seen from John with Corey is very much his pair programming methodology. So that looked like fun, and you're like, hey, I want some of that in my life. I want to have my code reviewed like this. Come sign up for Raise.dev. If you want more information, you can go to our Twitch page, into our highlights. You will find a video called Bridging the Developer Experience Gap. That is an interview with John where he explains everything about why we're doing Raise.dev and what it is. And that will give you all the info you need about how it all works, or how we hope it will all work. Again, early access, folks. How we hope it will all work. And then you'll be able to sign up at this link completely for free. So yeah, okay. Now I think I've done everything. So that's all from me. As I said, enjoy your weekend, and we'll catch you at the next one.